So I appreciate each of our ministry partners. It's a new tab on our app. And a few weeks ago, as we prepared for our church-wide prayer meeting, I reached out to a few of our ministry partners that work specifically on campuses within the United States, including Grace. And within 24 hours, after me requesting them to just write a short bio about themselves and to give us a little video update, and if they're okay with it, we'll put it on the app and also share it with our church. Within 24 hours, I got responses from each of the individuals that we reached out to. So we really appreciate their involvement with us. And it's one way that I think as a church that we could become more engaged in supporting their ministries as well. So we hope to expand this opportunity and to be more thoughtful and prayerful for each of our brothers and sisters serving God in different ways. So let's go ahead and pray together for grace. Father, we thank you for our sister Grace and for her faithfulness for nearly 20 years in being a part of World Impact in the LA Christian School. And Lord, she has poured her life into the lives of her students. She has built tremendous friendships with her staff, those that she teaches alongside of and that she leads. And she's gotten to know the parents that face challenges as well as opportunities that are unique to an underserved community in the heart of our city. And Father, we pray that you would continue to provide for her a reassurance that you are the God who is with her. And just as we have sung, that you are the God who walks on the water, who speaks to the sea, who stands in the fire beside us. And Lord, as she faces a variety of opportunities and challenges, we pray that you would show your faithfulness and your presence in her life. And Lord, that through the blessing of her life, that her students, that her staff and her families would be brought to a greater realization of who you are. And so, Father, we commit her and her ministry to you, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. He's a best-selling author who has an ability to shift our paradigms and to reorient the way that we look at things. And recently, Malcolm Gladwell explored the nature of battle between underdogs and giant competitors in a book entitled David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. And he actually opens his book with the story of David and Goliath. But in telling the ancient biblical narrative that is known around the world, he offers a take and a perspective that is maybe not what our kids hear in children's worship. It's not what our preschoolers hear when we step into the chapel and talk to them about the stories of the faithful men and women who have served God and trusted Him for impossible situations. And Gladwell challenges our perspective in how we think about disadvantages, obstacles. And rather than being intimidated and swallowed up and even defeated by these things, he actually says there's a good way to look at disadvantages as actually advantageous. Where obstacles that could easily trip us up, that could actually be stepping stones to greater opportunities and breakthroughs. And as he sees things in a radically different light, Gladwell identifies Goliath as the weakling, as the vulnerable one. And this is his paradigm shift. I mean, we look at Goliath and we think of this looming giant who has remarkable strength and arsenal that would intimidate the greatest of fighters. But Gladwell says, well, Goliath is really the man with the disadvantage. He's the one at a loss who is actually vulnerable. Being a giant, Gladwell says he was probably slow and maybe clumsy. And because he was larger than life, nearly 10 feet in height, He had a growth disorder and possibly that affected his vision, which is common for those that have human growth issues that result in an extraordinary height. And so he looks at Goliath as maybe slow and hard to move and a little bit clumsy, and possibly had a shield bearer to help navigate his direction because his vision wasn't so sharply focused. But David, being shorter, more nimble, like a point guard, like a running back, he could move through things fast. He could react. He could be swift and even crafty in his response. And that Goliath, the only way that he could really conquer David in this situation, according to Gladwell, was to literally get his hands on him and just smash him into the ground. But that wouldn't happen because David didn't have to get close to Goliath. And he stood as far away as he needed to, and he had a sling, which in the ancient world was a deadly weapon, because the rock in the sling would travel at a speed that would be hard to actually even see, so quick in travel. And once David persuaded the Israelites that single combat didn't have to be sword to sword, but that David could choose any weapon of his liking, then Gladwell says, well, it was a foregone conclusion. There is no way on the planet that Goliath would ever be victorious in a battle against David. And so he says that if looked at from the right angle, and he's always writing about perspectives and paradigms and ways that we look at things, Gladwell says people who seem to think that they are weak could actually turn out to be surprisingly strong, and conversely, those who have tremendous strengths could actually be vulnerable and suffer a crushing, humiliating defeat. And then he concludes, it is because of, and not despite, David's size and unorthodox choice of weapon that he's able to slay the lumbering giant. And we think, wow, that's really interesting. That's another take on the story of David and Goliath. And so his idea is well taken, that David, not Goliath, actually has the upper hand because of his physical stature not being a weakness, but actually a strength. And his weapon not being inferior, but actually, given the circumstances of the battle, the preferred weapon of choice. And so while his explanation is intriguing, I prefer the explicit conviction that really grips David. You see, David is not simply a believer, but he is actually overwhelmed with the underlying conviction. And this is the secret to his victory, that the battle belongs to the Lord. And that's his secret. It's not because he chose a sling and a few stones from the brook. It's not because he was shorter than Goliath, who was tall and slow and lumbering in movement and perhaps limited in his vision. It's not because of his agility or his skill in fighting and keeping a safe distance from Goliath. But it's because David knew that the battle belongs to the Lord. And that's true for you and me. You and I will experience victory in our life when we come to terms in realizing that it's not the weapon that I choose, it's not the stature of my life, it's not the size of our opponent, but it's the fact that the battle that we are engaged in belongs to the Lord. And when we know that the battle is the Lord's, then the victory will be ours. When you know that the battle belongs to the Lord, then the victory will be ours. And if our strength and our courage come from the Lord, then the praise and honor in our life will go to his name. Because by conquering our enemy in the battle, we introduce our Savior to the world. By conquering the enemy in our battle, we will introduce our Savior to the world. In other words, whenever we defeat the evil in our life, people see the good from our God. And the greatest good of all is exactly what we sang this morning. It's Jesus himself. Because they will see that he is not simply a good person or a good leader, but he is the ultimate expression of goodness from our Father in heaven. Undefeated, invincible, the pride of the Philistines, the terror of every other nation. It's like if you're playing pickup basketball at Wilson Park and you have a ringer of sorts and he's grabbing every rebound or she's making every shot. When you walk onto the court and the team sees you walk onto the court, they think, oh, we're done. There's no way that we could ever defeat that group of players. And Goliath was that person with a reputation that went before him. He had the stature, he had the resume, he had the track record. He was undefeated. He was invincible. He was a terror to be reckoned with. But this champion warrior finally meets his match in a shepherd boy. Just a shepherd boy who refuses to back down because he resolves to stand up. The young teen triumphs over this seasoned warrior because he cares more about the reputation of his God than he does about the discouraging, deflating, you can't do anything type of opinions that are coming from the people in his life. I've shared with you before that when I think about a title and a message, it's a lot like choosing a name for a child. You want to get some thought to it. So when I thought of Christopher and when Helen and I thought of Jonathan, we put a lot of weight into those names because they will carry those names for a long time unless they file for a legal name change, right? Naming your child is significant. Not the same level, but similar, okay? Similar. Naming a message to me is important. And so I'll come up with maybe 5, 10, 15 ideas. I'll just brainstorm. And there were 2 titles that were in my mind that I thought, I'm not sure which one, but let me go next door. Faith is next door to me. And so I said, hey, Faith, I have a couple titles that I'm thinking about. And the story of David and Goliath, this is my first title. A total mismatch. She didn't move. She's still listening. I said my second title is The Biggest Loser. She laughed out loud. She bent over. She loved it. And I thought, that's exactly the winner. Actually, the loser. That is the story of 1 Samuel 17. That Goliath is the biggest loser. He is a champion warrior. He is undefeated. He is a terror to be reckoned with. Until he meets a shepherd boy who couldn't care less about his reputation and who cares so much more for the name and the honor of his God. And if Goliath had a grave, and he didn't because the wild animals ate him up, if he had a grave, the 3 words on his tombstone would simply be the biggest loser. Because he becomes the biggest loser of all because David fights him in the name of the living God. And David, who was just anointed as the next king who would succeed Saul, who started well but turned out to be a failure. David will show that God had chosen a man after his own heart, someone who cared unbelievably more than anything else about the reputation of his God. And so let's go in our Bibles, if you haven't already, to the story of David Goliath. in 1 Samuel 17. It's page 243 in the blue Bible in front of you. And in verses 1 to 11, we see this seasoned warrior, a champion warrior who mocks the armies of the God who lives. And the description here is one of the most detailed descriptions of any character in the Bible. Because line after line, phrase after phrase, word after word accentuates the stature of this champion warrior, representing the Philistines, who were the nemesis of the people of God during the reign of Saul. And then in verses 12 to 58, we see this shepherd boy who defends the name of the God who saves, representing the nation that had been a thorn in the flesh to the people of God. A champion warrior mocks the armies of the God who lives. Take a look at verses 1 through 7. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Sukkah in Judah. They pitched their camp at Ephes-Dammim, between Sukkah and Azekah. And Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the Valley of Elah, and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. The notes in our Bible tells us that's about 125 pounds. This incredibly heavy coat of bronze armor, a picture of protection and strength. On his legs, he wore bronze sheaths and a bronze javelin was slung on his back, and his spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed the equivalent, 600 shekels, of 15 pounds, like a shot put. Just the tip of his spear alone was the weight of a shot put. If you were like Jasper and doing track and field, a shot put is incredibly heavy. And that's just the top of this spear. His shield bearer went ahead of him. The Philistines on one side of the hill, the Israelites on the other, a valley smack in the middle. The nations engaged what is called representative warfare, and that's where they would essentially try to minimize casualties and to expedite and accelerate the process, and they would send their champion fighter, their representative warrior, into the valley to wage war, and whoever would emerge victorious, then that nation would be declared the winner. And the loser then would become subjugated and subservient and essentially a slave to the nation that had just defeated them through this representative champion. And so the stakes are incredibly huge. This is not like, okay, we're going to have, best 2 out of 3. Kind of like, rock, paper, scissors, best out of 7. No, it's a battle. You send one in, you send another in. They duke it out. Whoever wins, they're triumphant. ! Battle over. Losers become the slaves, subjected to that nation that had just won. And the detail that the writer gives to us underscores his massive strength coupled with his towering frame. And he's literally a huge problem for the people of God. Standing nearly 10 feet in height, wearing a bronze helmet on his head, coat of armor that's 125 pounds in weight, having this huge spear with a shot put of a tip in terms of its weight. And Goliath has words to back up his appearance. Take a listen to his insulting, demeaning challenge in verses 8 through 11. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for the battle?" In other words, why even bother? It's already a foregone conclusion. Talk about presumption. Talk about confidence. He has never lost a battle. Why even waste your time? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Are we not the greatest, powerful, the most intimidating fighting force in the nation, in the world? And you're just servants of Saul, to be pitied, to be held with contempt and disrespect? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, then it's not going to happen. Then we'll become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, then you will become our subjects and serve us. And then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man, and let us fight each other." And on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites said, "We can handle that." They said, "No sweat." They said, "Yeah, we're going to send in our champion fighter." No, they didn't say any of that. Samuel says that they were dismayed and terrified. And I don't know if they went back to their camps and they're thinking, "Man, how could we ever defeat this guy? We're done. This is, don't even sacrifice a lamb. This is going to be a terrible outcome from the start. This guy is so terrifying," and shaking in their sandals and struggling in their boots and terrified in the depth of who they were. They saw themselves as a capital L, total loser, not a chance to come out victorious. And Saul would have been the natural choice to square off against Goliath, because the king of the nation would also be the leader in battle. And Saul, we know in the book of Samuel, was head and shoulders above everyone else, and he would have the best fighting chance to defeat this Philistine champion warrior. But Samuel tells us that Saul was just as terrified, just as petrified as every single one of his members in the army. He was no better than the rest. And Saul retreats in fear. His leadership is absent, totally missing. And then the scene shifts from this seasoned champion warrior of the Philistine who mocks the armies of the living God to a young guy, just a boy. They think he's probably about 17 or 18 years of age. We would say that he's simply a high school senior, a college-bound individual. But this young lad can't believe what he hears, because the one just anointed by Samuel to become Israel's next king shows everyone in the nation, us included, just exactly what he's made of. He shows through his confidence and his conviction that the battle is the Lord's, and that the name of God is the ultimate concern on his heart, that he shows that he is truly a man after God's own heart. That he becomes fearless in the midst of everyone else being dismayed and terrified, because he knows that the battle belongs to God. And this teenager is beside himself and outraged over the shame that's being inflicted on the people of God. And Samuel becomes what we would describe as a walk-on. He's not part of the army. He's not considered a warrior. He's just a shepherd boy. But this walk-on soldier becomes the triumphant warrior who leads Israel in victory over their greatest fear. Because a shepherd boy defends the name of the God who saves. Take a look at verses 12 to 15. Samuel introduces David and his family to us. Now, David was the son of a Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. And Jesse had a lot of sons. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time, he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest of the 8 sons. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Dad with 8 sons, the oldest 3 went to war with Saul. David was a shepherd boy who cared for the sheep of his father back in Bethlehem, which is about 15 miles from the Valley of Elah, where they were waging war against the Philistines. But David also had a part-time job being Saul's armor bearer. And we saw that in the previous chapter if you look at 1 Samuel. But Saul wants David to run an errand for him to bring food to the brothers at the front lines and also to find out how his brothers are doing. He wants David to get back from the 3 oldest guys, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah. He wants to get back from them a word of reassurance that everything is okay, that that the battle is in their favor, that they're safe. And as David checks in with his brothers, he finds out what's been happening twice daily for more than a month, 40 days, starting at verse 16. For 40 days, the Philistine, Goliath, came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to the camp." He's telling them to accelerate the pace in this more than half marathon, 15 miles to the front lines of the Valley of Elah from Bethlehem. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. There with Saul and all the men of Israel in the Valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, verse 20, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. Every day, twice a day, for 40 days. David left his things that he brought with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. We don't know his reaction at this point. Samuel simply says that he actually heard the taunt, the challenge, the demeaning insult levied against the people of God by Goliath, the Philistine champion. And whenever the Israelites saw the man, just the sight of him they all fled from him in great fear. David is doing everything that his father tells him to do. David is faithfully caring for the flock of his father's home, taking care of the sheep. Before he leaves, he finds someone to take care of the sheep. He gathers the supplies. He brings the supplies to the one who manages the supplies, the logistics person, and he gives this. Samuel is underscoring David's strong sense of responsibility. He's not abandoning the sheep. He's not just leaving the supplies anywhere. He's making sure someone watches them. He gives the supplies to the person responsible for handling the things that will sustain them in battle. And running to the battle lines, David catches up with his older brothers, and he wants to see how they're doing. And in the midst of the conversation, they actually see Goliath step out to the front lines, shout his usual defiance. This day I defy you. Send a person into battle. If they lose, then we'll conquer you guys. But if they win, which they won't, then we'll be your slaves. And instead of being terrified like everyone else in the camp, David is beside himself. He is utterly incensed. He is totally ticked off. Verse 25. Now the Israelites have been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asked the man standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies? And what follows is key: of the living God. And they repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. You see, the soldiers, they look at Goliath, and Goliath says, this day I defy you. You armies of Israel are a bunch of nothings. You send someone in, we'll square off, and we will be victorious. And the rest of the nation, they're bent out of shape because they're thinking, who is this guy? What is he? He's disrespecting us. He is defying the armies of Israel. But David took it up a notch. He saw things like Gladwell does with a very different paradigm. He didn't feel like they were just being disrespected as a nation. He didn't simply say, who is this Philistine Israelite basher who disrespects us as a people? But David says, who does this guy think he is that he would taunt the armies of Israel, of the living God? You see, David is beyond their identity as a nation, and he recognizes that what defines who they are is the relationship with the God, what they have with the God who lives, and the God who leads them, and the God whose battle this belongs to. And David is ticked off. He's absolutely incensed. He's beside himself because this giant, this uncircumcised, out of the covenant of God's champion warrior, whoever he is, he doesn't know who he's messing with. It's not just us as a people, but it's us as a people who are related to the living God. And so David is passionate. He is dedicated to, he is absolutely sold out for the name and the reputation of the God that he worships. Everyone else is upset that they're being trash talk. But David is absolutely livid that his living God is being dumped in the trash. And meanwhile, the eldest of Jesse's sons, he's also upset. Take a look at verse 28. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard David speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You come down only to watch the battle." And David said, "Now what have I done? Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. You know, if you have older brothers and older sisters, you could really relate to this, all right? We don't want to get too psychological and family history-ish on this passage, but if you have older brothers and older sisters, we've felt that before. We felt disrespected. We felt like, oh, you're just a little sister. You're just a little brother. You're not responsible. Where did you leave those few sheep? There's an insult there. It's like you don't really have a job. You're just watching over like 2 or 3 little sheep. You just have an evil heart. You just want to see what the real brothers are doing, battling war. You're so petty. You're so small. And the irony is that Eliab is the oldest of the 8 brothers who should have been the most perceptive and the most responsible and the most protective, is actually the most short-sighted and the most presumptuous and the most evil in its contempt and criticism of David. You see, David, in asking what's to be done for the one who removes this disgrace from Israel, he's not interested in the daughter of Saul or the wealth or not worrying about April 15th. It's not the reward, but in asking the question, it's an implied willingness on his part to do what has to be done. Word about David's interest in battling Goliath travels to the king. And so Saul sends for David, verse 31. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul. And Saul sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. And what was implied is now clearly expressed. Your servant will go and fight him. And Saul replied, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. It's another negative naysayer. David, you can't do it. Eliab said, what are you doing here? Why did you ditch the sheep? You're just an evil little brother. And now Saul hears David saying, I'm going to remove this disgrace out of Israel. I'm going to fight this guy. I'm going to be triumphant for the people of the living God. And Saul says, there's no way on earth that you could ever do this. You walk in there and it's a kamikaze mission. It's a suicide waiting to happen. You are absolutely out of your comfort zone. There's no way on earth that you could ever defeat this champion warrior. You're just a little boy, and he has been a fighter and a warrior from his youth. And David says to Saul, and he's not deterred, just like the same way that David turns to another soldier to find out what's to be given for the person who's victorious. David persists again with Saul, even in all due respect. He says, your servant, verse 34, has been keeping his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from his flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine, not even calling him by name, this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. And undeterred, unstopped, Saul realizes that he has a young guy in his hands who is absolutely committed to do one thing, and that's to step into the Valley of Elah and to do battle. And so he says, go, and the Lord be with you. That's like when we say, well, okay, I'll pray for you. God be with you. Okay, best wishes. All right, just go in, and I'm going to turn around and close my eyes. It's like you go into a basketball game and they keep missing free throws, and you think, well, maybe I close my eyes and they'll make the free throws. And maybe Saul's thinking, okay, if I just turn around and close my eyes, maybe he'll come out victorious. Verse 32, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and find him. It's a fighter spirit. It's a condition of a heart after God's own heart, who says, you know what, it's scary, and I don't absolutely know how the outcome's going to happen, but I know that the battle belongs to the Lord, and so I'm not going to back down. And David refuses to back down because he resolves to stand up for the God whose name has been dragged through the mud. Verse 38. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put on a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. And Saul was head and shoulders above everyone, a fighter, a champion warrior in his own right. And David fastened on his sword, that is the sword of Saul, over his tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. And we can only imagine the picture of it's like putting on a dress or a suit that definitely is way too big. And David is being dressed with the military arsenal of a man that is head and shoulders above himself. And as David is trying to get used to what Saul has just put on him, he's probably walking like this, and he says to Saul, I can't go with these because I'm not used to them. And so he took them off without any visible protection, no coat of armor, no helmet, swordless. He took his staff in verse 40, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in his pouch, in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in hand, approached the Philistine. Saul hears from David, I can't use what you use. That's your stuff. I got to use what I'm comfortable with. Things that I use as a shepherd to protect and to defend the sheep that I shepherd. And so on the one side, Goliath ridicules the young shepherd boy and announces his doom. And then David counters Goliath's insults with his own one-upped, confident prediction of victory. A victory that will vindicate and reveal the one true God to everyone. Take a look at verses 41 and following. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome. We would say he was fresh. And he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And he said to David, "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." And David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the gods of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head." And I can imagine what the Israelites are thinking on the sidelines. Go, David, or no, David, no, David. There are probably some there saying, "David, okay, we like confidence, but don't be cocky. Just say, I'll win. Don't say cut off the head." I mean, that's really kind of, have you looked at him? This very day, I will give the carcasses of that means they're all dead, of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. Don't you love that? Goliath said, "David, I'm going to feed you to the animals." And David says, "No, I'm going to feed all of you guys to the animals." That's nothing, David says. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel, because that's what's at stake. And all those gathered here will know that it's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Fighters square off. They make predictions. Goliath predicts loss to Israel. David says, "You will completely be defeated." Because it's not your battle. It's not your weapons. The battle is the Lord's. And everyone's going to know that when everything is said and done, when all of your army is fed to the birds of the air, they're going to know that there is one God in this world. And it's the living God who saves us. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, verse 48, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. He is filled with excitement. Reaching into his bag, taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. I mean, could you imagine Hollywood taking this? It'd be 3 hours until we get to this point. And then it would be another hour. But Samuel just simply tells us what happened. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistines with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. And David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. And after he killed him, he cut off his head with a sword. This is what children and children's worship love to read about. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and they ran. They freaked out. They had a panic attack. Then the men of Israel, all of a sudden they're full of courage, and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sharaim road to Gath and Ekron. And when the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. And David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. And parenthetically, as Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" And Abner replied, "As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." Back to the battle. As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" And Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." Every child loves the story of David and Goliath. You tell the story in children's worship during break time out in the playground. The kids say, "Hey, let's play David and Goliath. You know, you're taller than me, so I'm David and you're Goliath." I mean, every child, every student, every adult of all ages, we love a story of an underdog defeating a champion warrior. And what attracts Malcolm Gladwell to this particular story is that there is beauty and greatness in David and Goliath like fights where the underdog emerges victorious. It's where the one who doesn't seem to stand a chance winds up slaying this huge, fearsome fighting machine. But what do we do with a story like this? Apart from role-playing on the playground, David and Goliath. How does it relate to the battles in my life, the wars that you wage? We will never encounter a champion warrior who stands nearly 10 feet in height, where the stakes are as huge as they were in this representative warfare in the Valley of Elah. Yet we are engaged in actual spiritual war against the forces of darkness. It's a battle that goes on in our lifetime until we reach the life to come. Because Goliath-like giants will taunt us with feelings of guilt. God doesn't forgive you. How could you ever experience God's grace to cleanse you and to purify you if you've done something so crummy and awful in your life? The powers of this dark world will mock our efforts to obey God and to follow Jesus. And the enemies of this dark world will say, you're a failure. You don't have it within you. You're so irresponsible. You're just a little believer. The enemy of the church of the living God intimidates us from doing what's good and from pursuing God's kingdom. Whenever you find yourself standing in a valley, waging war against the forces of darkness, what's at stake is nothing short of the name and the honor of the living God. And so in these moments, we've got to clutch on to that truth that grips David. The battle belongs not to sword, not to weapons, not even to us, but the battle belongs to the Lord. Because in trouble and hardship, even sword and nakedness and famine, Paul says to the Romans, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. And so if we put on the armor of God, we can stand firm and win the battle. Because John writes in his first letter, greater is the one that is in us than the one that is in the world. Because when we win the battle over temptation, over sin, and even over Satan, the victory is eye-opening and it's life-changing. By conquering our enemy in battle, we introduce our Savior to the world. Whenever you defeat whenever I win over evil in our lives, then we help others to see the goodness of the God who sent his Son into the world to destroy the works of the evil one. Let's pray together. There are times, Father, when we feel that we are at the disadvantage, that we don't have what it takes to win the battle. But Lord, when we shake and when we feel fear and when we experience anxiety, we pray that you would bring to our minds the conviction that grips the heart of David, that the battle belongs to the Lord, and that you are the one who will fight before us, that you stand with us in the fire, that you speak to the waves, and that you calm the seas. And Lord, what you have done with the world around us physically is what you could do with us, even in the world that we do not see. And so help us to be strong in the Lord and in the strength of your might. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.